As we continue our exploration of Adobe Premiere, I think it's important to spend a little bit of time discussing some of the preferences. And this can be somewhat confusing in an application like Premiere because there's so many different areas in which you can configure and optimize settings to best suit your editing habits. With that being said, I'd like to give you a general tour of some of the things that you can configure. And the great thing is, remember, you're working with the Creative Cloud version of Adobe Premiere, which means many of these preferences will be able to sync to Creative Cloud. This will give you access to these preferences on a different machine at some point in time. So that's a really handy thing to have available to you. The first thing that we should take a look at are the general preferences in the General Preferences dialog box. Now, what's important to understand about the General Preferences dialog box, at least that's what I'm calling it, is it's really the preferences inside of Premiere, in that these are application specific. So if you come in and make modifications and changes to these preferences, you're changing these preferences globally inside of Premiere. So whether you're working on a current project or a new project later on down the road, these settings are persistent across those projects. So how do you access this menu? Well, here on the Mac, you'll come up here to the Premiere Pro menu. And from there, you'll choose Preferences. Now, if you're on a Windows machine, you'll go to the Edit menu, and from there, you'll choose the same Preferences option. And you'll notice, of course, that there's several different subcategories that you can choose from. Like many preference dialog boxes in Creative Cloud, no matter which one you choose, it will open the same Preferences dialog box. It's just going to have that category selected for you. So as you can see, there's several different categories for you to come in here and make modifications to make sure that Premiere is working the way that you want it to work. For example, maybe you don't like the welcome screen. And if you don't like the welcome screen, you can come over and choose Open Most Recent when you start up Premiere. And of course, this is in the general category. So these are some of the basic settings that are available here. And to be honest with you, as a new Premiere Pro user, you probably won't have much need to come in here and make modifications. But as you work more and more with Premiere and you get into some of the finer details of the application and some of the finer details of editing, certainly some of these preferences can change how you work within the application. For now, I'm just going to come down here and click Cancel. I just want to point out that these preferences, again, are preferences that you're controlling for the application, not the project. So if you change it now, it will stay that way until you change it back, regardless of the project that you're working on. So because we have application-wide settings, we also have project settings. If you come up to the File menu, from the File menu, you can choose Project Settings. And you'll notice you have two options. You have General and Scratch Disks. Either way, if you select one of those commands, it's going to open the same dialog box, which is the Project Settings dialog box. And in this case, because I selected General, the General tab is active. And if you take a look at this, it's essentially the same options that we configured when we created a new project. So that's the great thing about Premiere. When you create a new project, you're not really boxing yourself into those settings. You can always come back here and make modifications. Likewise, you could do the same for Scratch Disks. Again, I'll go ahead and click Cancel for now. Not only do you have settings for the project and preferences for the application, you also have sequence-specific settings. And the sequence, remember, is essentially what you're piecing together here inside the timeline. Now, if we take a look at the project panel for just a moment, you can see that we have clips. And these clips can contain video and audio. But as you continue to scroll down and look through the elements within the Projects panel, eventually you'll find a little icon that represents a sequence. You could have as many sequences as necessary within a project, and because of that, those sequences can have unique and specific settings. So how do you get to the sequence settings? Well, it's important to make sure that the Sequence panel is active. You know it's active because it has a blue highlight around the panel. Then you can come up to the Sequence menu, and from there, you can choose Sequence Settings. This, of course, is going to open up a dialog box. This is where you can establish your editing mode. Now, what you configure here will ultimately change the media that you drop into the sequence. So if you want to change the time base or the frame size or the shape of the pixels, you have that ability within this dialog box, and then all of your media will conform to those settings. Right now, it's obvious that I'm working in a 720p workflow based upon the frame size, but if you need to make modifications and changes not only to the video but the audio, these options are available here. Again, I don't want to get hung up on the actual meaning of all of these settings. I just want to point out that these settings exist. It would be overwhelmingly boring if I went through all of these features. We will get there, but we'll talk about them as it makes sense within the course. So again, I'll go ahead and cancel out of this dialog box. So again, we have application preferences, which are available within the preferences dialog box. Then we have project settings that we can configure, and then we have sequence settings. On top of that, we also have settings that we can configure on a panel by panel basis. Remember, each panel has a submenu or a contextual menu for that panel. So in this case, in the project panel, maybe I want to change the view of the media. You can do that by choosing something like list. When you do that, you'll notice that everything is now in a list format instead of seeing the little thumbnails. Likewise, if we come up towards the top, we can choose something like preview area. And what this does, if you come over here and select a clip, is it creates a little preview and gives you information about that clip. And this is a common interface element that they no longer display by default, but they used to in earlier versions of Premiere. So if you're missing that feature, this is how you can get it back. I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to the icon view, and I want to turn off the preview area, and I just want to point out a couple other things. Not only can you access this information oftentimes from the contextual menu, but sometimes you can also right-click or control-click. Now, the menu's a little bit different. Many of the options within the menu are the same, but again, it's a different way to access the information. The last thing that I want to point out is that you'll see a little plus sign in the source and program monitors. If you click that, a little panel will open, giving you the ability to configure the buttons that are displayed within these panels. So again, I don't want to get hung up on the actual meaning of all this stuff. I just want you to know that it's there and it exists. At some point, it'll make sense for you to come in and make modifications to customize Premiere. But for now, the important takeaway is to know that they are in fact available to you.